Dog by Daniel Pennac, chapters 22 through 24. Hyena and Wild Boar. There are lots of things you could say about Hyena because he was a complex character. He loved practical jokes for a start. He tried them out at every opportunity, and they weren't always in the best taste. But no one ever got angry with him because Hyena was very popular. Actually, it irritated him that everyone was so fond of him. He wanted to be known as a cruel, wild beast. With a face like mine, I deserve a bit of respect, don't you think? Hyena's problem was that he looked too kind for his own good. The moment he heard Dog crying, he decided to look after him, and it was in his nature to help out and fight injustice and try to understand everyone's point of view. Trouble is, he said, I'm allergic to biting. And a confused smile spread across his face, revealing two enormous fangs that were yellow and slightly worn at the tips, because he wasn't a young dog anymore. But if someone attacked Wild Boar, would you defend him? Dog asked him. The look on Hyena's face changed immediately, and Dog felt the same terror that had run through him on the evening of their first encounter. There's only one Wild Boar, and no one messes with him. Then the smile returned to his lips, and he added, No one messes with my friends. Wild Boar was a ticket inspector or an engine driver or something like that, a railway man at any rate. That was his job. When he saw the two dogs waiting for him to arrive on the 12 minutes past midnight, he said casually, Hello, Hyena. So you brought a friend with you. Well, he's certainly not a looker. Nature excelling herself again. Hyena split his sides with laughter, and all three of them soon found themselves in Wild Boar's home. Then he took off his cap. Wild Boar really was a spitting image of a wild boar. He had a big head with stiff eyebrows and black hair he couldn't put a comb through. He was very solid and not a very pretty picture. When we catch the subway together, said Hyena, everyone leaves the car. Wild Boar's apartment was a cross between a treasure grove and a junk shop. There were paintings all over the walls, and everywhere you looked, statues patiently carved out of heavy wood by Wild Boar. Some of these works of art depicted Hyena himself, but they showed a very handsome hyena, the sort of hyena he might have been in real life, if real life hadn't botched the job. What was striking about Wild Boar's work was the way he'd managed to catch Hyena's intelligence, not to mention his bravery and recklessness, as well as his taste for practical jokes. But underneath all of that, he'd also caught the serious side of his character. A distant sadness that couldn't be seen with the naked eye or in a photograph. Those pictures and sculptures bore more than a passing resemblance. Hanging from the walls and proudly positioned over the mantelpiece, they really did look like him. Dog immediately recognized Hyena. Well, I never. It's you. How'd you manage to look so handsome up there? Love changes the way you see things, Hyena answered, trying to look modest. And so Dog moved in with Hyena and Wild Boar. The apartment was both of theirs because you couldn't really say it just belonged to Wild Boar. Hyena had exactly the same rights as his owner, although he always referred to him as his friend rather than his owner, and none of the rooms were out of bounds. But Hyena didn't try to take advantage of this. I don't sleep in his bed. We're both so big, we'd get in each other's way. Every other day, Hyena and Dog would accompany Wild Boar to the station. Sometimes it was a morning trip and sometimes an evening one. Then they would take a stroll together through the streets of the city. Seduction is the only answer. After the stroll, they'd head back to Wild Boar's apartment. Hyena knew how to open all the doors, which is no mean feat for a dog. He also knew how to close them again, which is even more impressive. You need to learn these tricks if you want to keep your independence, shutting a door, wiping your paws, drinking from the tap. But who taught you? Asked Dog. Wild Boar, of course. Dog didn't understand how Wild Boar could be Hyena's owner and teach him to be a free dog at the same time. He's not my owner, repeated Hyena for the umpteenth time. He's my friend. What's the difference between an owner and a friend? Asked Dog. Hyena patiently explained. He taught Dog everything. Everything Blacknose hadn't had time to teach him. Everything Woolly would have taught him if they hadn't met at the dog pound. Thanks to those two, you already know a great deal, pointed out Hyena, who was clearly impressed. Because of Blacknose, you've got the best nose for smells of any dog I've met. You can pick out a choice cuts at first glance. and there's no danger of you being run over by a car. As for your friend from the dog pound, he didn't teach you about bravery and loyalty. They were both fine dogs, but you were lucky to have met them. Dog agreed, and now Hyena was filling in the gaps. He spoke to Dog about human beings and dogs, about the relationships between them. What'd you do if a human being wants to hit you, for example? I attack him first, replied Dog, bristling. You nitwit! You couldn't frighten a fly. That's not true, protested Dog. I frightened a fat lady in the town. I know, you told me, but only because she was short-sighted and mistook you for a rat. Human beings are scared stiff of rats. All right, then, what am I supposed to do if human beings attacks me? You sit back, make yourself look as idiotic as possible, and stare, tilting your head to the side with one ear drooping and the other ear perked up. And where does that get you? It makes them all gooey simple as that. You won't find a human who doesn't become as gentle as a lamb after that, however tough they think they are. Heine looked thoughtfully all of a sudden. I'm going to tell you something very important, Dog. He was concentrating so hard that his whole forehead crumpled up. Yes? Here goes. When you're as ugly as you are, seduction is the only answer. What does seduction mean? Hyena's whole head disappeared into the furrows on his brow. It means knowing how to make people want you. And how do you do that? Silence, followed by a long stare, and then a sigh. I'll teach you that too. Mixed up kids. Dog talked about Plum all the time. He described every aspect of her character, how stubborn she was, the tantrums she flew into, how kind and gentle she'd been those first few days, the power she had over grown-ups, her unexpected cruelty later on, everything. I don't want to disappoint you, yawned Hyena, but your little Plum isn't unusual. She's just a kid like all the rest. She's getting ready to become a grown-up. But for the time being, she's all mixed up. Mixed up? Well, fickle, if you prefer. That's what adults call it. But she's not really fickle. She's just mixed up because she doesn't really know what she wants yet. Dog didn't understand, so Hyena took him to see other mixed-up kids. It was a gray afternoon, except for a tiny ray of sunlight between 3 and 4 o'clock. School playgrounds and parks were filled with tiny, noisy children making the most of the sunshine. Dog and Hyena sat next to each other on the side railings watching. The children were playing, if you could call it playing, under the chestnut trees. Are those really games? Dog wondered. The children were taking part in complicated activities in pairs or small groups. One moment they were as quiet as mice, and the next a fight would break out. But then the arguments stopped as suddenly as they began, and everyone went back to playing. In a corner of the playground near the slide, Dog noticed a short, fat boy with a bright pink face. He was sitting on his bottom and bawling his eyes out. His mouth was open wide, and his tears splashed down his cheeks. He looked so sad he thought he might die, thought Dog, who felt faint. But a chestnut leaf twirled in the air and landed just in front of the short, fat, pink creature. He stopped crying just like that and smiled angelically at the leaf, as if nothing else mattered in the world. A little girl on the path was saying something to another little girl who was all ears. A third little girl wandered past. The little girl who'd been listening left the little girl who had been talking to catch up with the other little girl who'd wandered past. The little girl who'd been talking carried on talking to herself, giggling at the end of every sentence as if nothing had happened. She walked past the sand, and there Dog noticed Tidy Boy. Tidy Boy had a bucket and a spade, and he just built a 14th tower for his sand castle. It was a beautiful tower with crenellation, maculations, and arrow slits. Tidy Boy wore glasses, and he was concentrating very hard. He traced the outlines of stone blocks on a series of ramparts linking his towers. Right now he was polishing the surface on the 14th tower with the back of his spade, carefully blowing away the excess sand and feasting his eyes on the handiwork. How long had it taken him to build? He must have the patience of a saint, thought Dog. Teddy Boy lifted his head. There was a strange glint in his eye. He jumped up, stretched out his arms, and began making an engine noise, circling his castle like a motorized bird. And then, without warning, ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, bang! He kicked over the towers and ramparts. There were explosions, showers of sand, clouds of dust, and ugly craters. What a disaster! Soon, nothing was left of the magnificent sandcastle and its 14 towers. Then, just like that, Tidy Boy stopped being a fighter bomber. He picked up his spade, stowed it neatly in his bucket, and headed off as if nothing happened. Silence. The first drops of rain began to fall. Dog was flabbergasted. Now do you understand? Hyena asked at last. But Dog could not answer. He just stayed where he was. Hyena's right, he thought. These kids are just as mixed up as Plum. They change games and interests and the looks on their faces faster than the wind changes direction. And they're just as unpredictable. They're never the same from one moment to the next. And Dog remembered the days, which already seemed a long time ago, when he couldn't manage to follow one smell at a time. He'd been just as mixed up as these kids. Now, for the first time, he understood what Hyena meant when he said, "We grow up 7 times faster than they do, and that's what makes it difficult." Without even realizing, Dog had become an adult, but Plum was still a child, and she was all mixed up, the way kids are. It was raining buckets, and the playground was empty. Dog was lost in his daydreams, but he could just make out the far-off sound of Hyena's voice. "Come on, follow me. We're going to find Wild Boar."